Hey everyone, Token Dave over here, dorky talking black guy that's just trying to get by. And welcome to another edition of AA, Adaptation Application. Here, I share my thoughts on how well an original or already established story has been adapted into a new or an updated medium. And this particular AA is in conjunction with Helltober, my celebration of horror and Halloween for the month of October. So, in this installment of AA, I am going to tackle another Stephen King adaptation. And that is, his story, or his novella, Cycle of the Werewolf. Now, Cycle of the Werewolf was the original novella for the 1985 movie, Silver Bullet. Before I get into anything else, spoiler alert, okay? I did my best as possible to not spoil anything in my initial review. So if you saw my review and didn't get anything and was curious about watching the movie, stop right here, watch the movie and come back. But if you don't care, let's go right into it, okay? Now, normally I would try to basically go into, comparing the themes, how well the characters were portrayed, and something extra. Here, I can't totally do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mainly compare the time periods, and I will still do the characters, but I will also basically spoil a climax and express how, basically things were paced out in both the movie and the novella, alright? So, this was actually my very first Stephen King story that I read. As a kid, I had basically a learning disability as well as a reading disability. And I started to, when I started to learn how to read and all more efficiently, it was very hard for me to put books down. Hence, I was reading a lot of books. And, I accidentally, in trying to improve my reading, I actually picked out, Cycle of the Werewolf, thinking that basically it was, a fun horror story, not realizing that it was done by Stephen King, and then when I read it, I was like, oh my god, this is actually Silver Bullet. So, this one actually this story is actually a sense of pride for me because, it's my first Stephen King story. Anywho, so let's start off with the setting. All right. Now, in the novella, the novella came out. The novella came out in either 1981 or 1982. If I am wrong about this, correct me. I know I should have done additional research, but in a bit of a time frame here. Anyway, so the novella took place in the very early 80s, right? Right when it came out. Comparing that to the movie Silver Bullet, where Silver Bullet took place actually in the mid-70s. Now, this change for me works. Why does it work? Keep in mind that, Stephen King really started rising to prominence in the 70s, and his success did continue on into the 80s. But in the early 80s, we were still having that hangover or the lag from the 70s. So basically, having the movie take place in the mid-70s is not that much of a stretch, because around the mid-70s, things of the 70s were more established. So it works to its benefit, number one. Another change is that in the novella, actually, I keep calling it a novel, it's really a novella. In the novella, the Cycle of the Werewolf itself starts in January of the beginning of 1981, 1982, all the way to December of 1981, 1982. Whereas in the movie, everything is taking place from the spring of 1976 all the way till New Year's Eve of 1976. Now, this one is one of those things where it's not a improvement, nor is it a detractor. Because actually, if you tend to think about it, like basically with the murders that were occurring, you know, they could still work out in that small time frame, you know. However, when we get into how the movie was put together and everything, then that will change, which we'll get to shortly. Alright? Now, let's go into the characters of the movie. You know, we have our main protagonist, Marty Koslow. Well, Marty Koslow, actually. Marty Koslow is actually, like, you know, the wheelchair-bound elementary school student and everything, who actually believes that a werewolf is on the loose in his town. Now, slight change. Marty is 10 in the movie, in the novella, where in the movie itself, he's 11. Not much of a stretch, to be honest with you. And another thing but what really actually, like, you know, makes Marty more of a compelling character is that, you know, you already get that basically his family, like, you know, really coddles him a little bit to a degree and everything, but by him being coddled, he is still a good-natured boy. And, you know, you really got to see him being that sweet, good-natured kid in the movie tenfold. He's actually better developed in this movie because in the movie itself, you know, you actually meet Marty early on. As opposed to the novella, you actually end up meeting Marty in the middle of the story. As well as basically you end up meeting his sister. Now, here are a couple of differences. Number one, in the novella, his sister is actually 13. Whereas in the movie itself, they made her much older. She's actually a high school student. Now, with this, actually, I feel that this was an improvement. And the reason why this was an improvement is the fact that, you know, you really got a sense of his older sister, like, you know, really, really resenting Marty, but mature enough to realize that Marty was really not a bad kid. It's just the fact that she is forced to watch him a little too much more than she wants to, you know. And also, I will say that they actually changed the sister's name, whereas in the novella, her name is Kate. In the movie, her name is Jane. And another change of name is actually Marty's uncle. In the movie, his name is Red. However, in the novella, his name is Al. You know. Now, Al himself, you know, it has like Uncle Al in, well, no, I should say Uncle Red. All right, comparing both Red and Janie to Al and Kate, right? In the movies, these two characters have a longer development. You know, you get to actually see their motivations a little bit more, and both of them took a more active role of the occurrences in the movie. Particularly Janie, you know, because Janie was mainly in just like one chapter, whereas Marty and Al were predominantly in, like, you know, about 4 of the chapters in the novella. And to be honest with you, having the story of, you know, everything that happened narrated by Jane, great improvement. Now we shall get to the werewolf, you know, Reverend Lowe, you know. Now, in the novella, basically, Reverend Lowe actually, we find out that he was not bitten by a werewolf. He accidentally picked flowers from a strange place and then realized that he became a werewolf. You know, you get that explanation in the novella. In the edition, right, when Marty finds out whom the werewolf is, basically, Marty and Jenny in the movie basically send letters to him. And the Reverend quickly deduces whom is the one that is sending him these letters. These letters are like, we know who you are, you should kill yourself, as opposed to the novella, Reverend Lowe did not realize it until December, at the very end of the chapter. Not the end of the chapter, but he didn't realize it until the end of November, the end of the chapter before the ending of the book. Now, in addition, Reverend Lowe actually takes a more active role in trying to kill Marty as a pastor, as opposed to basically, in the novella, where, he didn't know who Marty was, so he didn't know who Marty was. He waited until the full moon came out to actually go towards Marty's home. This change actually made Reverend Lowe much more of a dangerous antagonist, someone that's like menacing, and it also goes into one of Stephen King's normal themes about, God versus the devil and everything, where, there's like those that are closer to God but actually fall from grace in God's eyes, where Reverend Lowe is basically dude's a pastor and everything, but yet this is the person that has supposed to have a high moral compass, and we keep seeing how religious figures held to a higher statute are actually more corrupted and, are bigger villains than how they're portrayed and everything, which is a very interesting take, which is something that I really enjoyed about the movie more than the novella. Now, here's where things get a little tricky, Now, the novella is very strict about having things happen from January to December, but some of the occurrences are a little disheveled. Like, for example, when Marty first encountered Reverend Lowe as a werewolf, this was due to fireworks being canceled in the 4th of July. Whereas in the movie, this actually took place in the fall, more likely October of 1979, and that didn't really make much sense. I understand that it was a small town and it was a fair, but a fireworks display is more prevalent during the 4th of July, where early in the movie, basically, you had a bit of a 4th of July celebration or, gathering. In addition, early in the movie, a group of people, noticing that a killer was on the loose, they went out in packs to try to catch the killer, only for them to be slaughtered. Whereas in the novella, this actually occurred later on in the novella. Actually, it occurred in November in the novella. And it made more sense because basically, in the movie itself, basically, Marty survives the werewolf attack and tells people that a werewolf was on the loose, and no one believes him, which doesn't really make sense because in the movie itself, when a group of people went out to try to find the killer, they were slaughtered by a werewolf, and there were survivors there. So how could they not believe Marty's story? In addition, basically, not only did they not believe Marty's story, they did not believe that Reverend Lowe was a werewolf, which is very ironic because basically both people ended up having the same injury from Marty, at that time period. And to top it off, with a werewolf being on the loose, it should not be any coincidence that basically both Reverend Lowe and the werewolf had the same injury. So, those are my biggest gripes about this adaptation. However, one thing that I gotta say is that the movie itself expands the characters, gets us more into the movie, gives us more kills at a quicker pace, and as well as basically establishes Reverend Lowe as a more threatening villain. All in all, I gotta say, as an adaptation, Silver Bullet is on point. Agree? Disagree? Drop me a comment below. Give me a like. Follow me on Facebook at Token Dave or on Twitter at TokenDave80. Subscribe and ring that bell so you know when a new video loads. But until then, this has been Token Dave, the dorky token black guy who's just trying to get by. I'll catch you guys later.